Well, welcome back, and I hope that you can excuse my congestion and sniffling today. But I thought that we would talk about one of the favorite topics ever, toxic masculinity. There seems to be a lot of confusion outside of the feminist and anti feminist circles, although perhaps within as well, about the definition of toxic masculinity. So I thought that I today would address two definitions, which seem to be really the only ones out there, to my knowledge. And the first is that the notion that masculinity itself is inherently toxic. Just being male makes you toxic. So, a professor at Occidental University, Lisa Wade was her name, recently said the problem is not toxic masculinity, it's that masculinity is toxic. So that line of thinking would certainly be in line with a lot of the second wave feminists and, well, up through today for sure, and long before. And Andrea Dworkin, who said every woman's son is her potential betrayer and also the inevitable rapist or exploiter of another woman. This definition is so patently absurd, so sexist, so bigoted that I really don't even want to dignify it with much of a response. But let's state the obvious today. This definition is hateful, it's indefensible, and it is intellectually dishonest. So we can see this when we reverse the sexes. So, for example, moms abuse children more than dads do. That's a fact. But do we attribute this stat to toxic femininity? No, we do not. Of course not. When it comes to women, we have the sensibility to recognize that even primarily female perpetrated crimes are not a direct result of being female. When women do bad things, it's not femininity itself that's to blame, but when men do bad things, we apparently cannot apply this same logic to masculinity. I'm not going to spend much time on that definition. It is pointless and absurd. But the other definition is the one I'd like to really address today, and that is, quote, adherence to traditional male gender roles. So, the fact that men seek to compete with and dominate other men, express their frustration through anger rather than crying, to be self-reliant, sexually assertive, violence, aggression, toughness, all of these are considered hallmarks of toxic masculinity. And no matter what definition you look up, you will find this or some variation of this definition. Now, first, before we get into this, let's acknowledge that there are different kinds of men, right? There are different personalities of men. You don't have to be a John Wayne or a Clint Eastwood clone to be a, quote, real man, right? You don't need a specific personality to be a real man, and I think that's an increasingly important point in an age now where if a man has less traditional interests, he's quickly branded as, as gay, or he's harboring a different identity, or he should be trans or something. No, if you were born with male parts, you are a real male. So let's just get that out of the way. But today I want to talk about the men who do exude traditional masculinity, who do kind of fit this particular role. So let's think about some of these traits. Anger, assertiveness, dominance, aggression. These are not moral or immoral traits and emotions in and of themselves. Anger is a good thing, can be a good thing, depending on what it drives you to do. If it drives you to shoot up a school, that's bad. If it drives you to rescue sex trafficking victims and to rebel against the injustice you see in the world, that's good. Being authoritative, an authoritative father figure in your home, it's bad if it turns into abusing your children, but it's overall a pretty good thing from all the studies that I've seen and all the statistics. Children need a more authoritative father figure in the home. The desire to dominate. This can either turn a guy into a bully, or it's also what drives a man to succeed. It drives him to success in sports, or to rise to the top of his profession. So we could say the same thing about aggression. Aggression is bad when it's misplaced, but I'll be the first to say that if I were walking, if I were to meet a dangerous criminal in a back alley, I would be incredibly grateful to find that the man walking with me was capable of unleashing some aggression at the right time. So, a man who is authoritative, aggressive, angry, and yes, dangerous is not a problem. The problem is when a man like this has no moral compass. No moral compass. No concern for his fellow human being. No love. All of these traits then are misdirected. And I think it's important that we grasp this. Masculinity, just like femininity for that matter, needs to be morally contained, restrained by morals, not actually diminished. A simple analogy might be a bull. You guys know I grew up on a farm. They are powerful creatures. They have explosive strength. They're dangerous. I grew up in a community where, every once in a while you would hear of a bull who had turned on his owner and gored him to death. So if you didn't want to be killed by your bull, you had two options. You either castrate him or you give him fences, put him in a pen. It might be a silly analogy, but why is it that our society has chosen castration? Why is it that we've decided that men need to be made less dangerous rather than that men need to keep that danger under control? There are many answers to this question, not the least of which is that we're afraid to talk about morality and where it comes from. But I also think a large part of the answer is that women dictate so much in our society right now. I think a lot of mothers do this, and that's one of the many reasons that fathers are a crucial part of a child's life. A lot of moms look around, and when they see young men who are obnoxious, cruel jerks, don't care how their actions affect other people, they say, and rightly so, "Not my little Johnny. He's going to be sweet forever." But essentially that means he's going to be harmless. I'm going to keep him from developing into a man, essentially. She tries usually without realizing it to prevent him from becoming a man. Here's the thing. Make men into nice, quiet, sniveling, harmless little subservients, if that were possible, and they will be no less harmful or less evil. This is the reality of the human condition, right? We all have evil within us, and every woman who's ever dated a guy who she thought was a nice, safe guy who really just turned out to be a more emotional, effeminate, manipulative, underhanded jerk knows this. They may be less angry, but they'll be more passive-aggressive. They may be less likely to be controlling of their families, but they're more likely to take a hands-off approach and just check out and not take initiative, not take their presence there seriously. I remember watching a lecture by Jordan Peterson, or part of one, in which he's speaking about how we really have no insight into our capacity for good until we have some idea of our capacity for evil. And frankly, that's a fairly biblical principle. But he talked about how, a man who isn't harmful, who isn't dangerous, isn't inherently more virtuous. It's just that he doesn't have the capability. And one of my favorite quotes of his is, "The fact that a rabbit doesn't eat you isn't a reflection of its virtue. The rabbit is just incapable of doing so." So making men weaker or more effeminate does not infuse them with goodness. Masculinity does not need to be tempered by femininity. Men do not need to get in touch with their feminine side, as was the mantra in the 80s during the push to, ridicule macho men and turn them into Barry Manilow caricatures. The solution isn't to water down A with B, it's to introduce C, integrity, love, selflessness. By the way, that is the definition of biblical meekness. It is strength under control. So when the Bible says that Moses was the meekest man on earth, it doesn't mean he never raised his voice or got angry or acted out. He did all of those things, considering that he was a man who fled Egypt because he killed a man with his bare hands, and so he was afraid for his life. This isn't the kind of guy who was just, a wimp and and had no capabilities. He simply kept them under control. We could talk all day about where goodness and morality come from. That's another topic for another day because it's its own video or its own series. I don't know if we'll get into that. But the bottom line is, it is not masculinity itself, nor the traditional definition of it, that is the problem. So I say 3 cheers for the men who sweat and grunt and lunk. Yes, that is a dig at modern gyms. And men who split their own wood like a lumberjack and build their own houses with their bare hands, as my husband did. And for 1 second, can we stop ignoring the fact that males and females are different? That as a whole, we think and operate and process emotions differently. There is nothing wrong with a man crying, but it's this supposedly toxic ability that men have to control their emotions that make them useful and cause them to do something in times of crisis rather than finding themselves weeping in a corner. So thank God for dangerous men. They go to danger. Like Victor Marx, he rescues children who are being used as sex slaves for ISIS in Iraq. They hazard their lives like Tommy Robinson does to talk about the Muslim grooming gangs in the UK, even though it's so politically incorrect to do so that he's been banned from social media platforms. He's been imprisoned. He's had countless attempts made on his life. It's supposedly toxic men who settled the frontier, built our cities and civilization, go to space, protect others from criminals, stand up to dictators, rush into burning buildings, lead other men and communities and their own families, speak up for the persecuted, and provide for their families. Not every man needs to fit these profiles. That's not what I'm saying, but stop pathologizing the ones who do. Stop pathologizing testosterone. So thank God. Thank God for dangerous men, and may we raise more of them. And if a dangerous man is an inherently toxic man, then I say thank God for toxic masculinity. Thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you back here next time.